Hi, everybody. We're looking at the Ukrainian military announcing this week that its forces used U.S. provided ATACMS missiles in strikes on Russian territory. Russia's defense ministry then confirmed that Ukrainian forces did fire at least 4 U.S. made ATACMS at the southern Russian city of Voronezh. We know these missiles were provided under the Biden administration back in 2023, but they require targeting data provided by the United States in real time. So when I look at U.S. involvement and the reality that Washington could simply back off and tell Kyiv no more support, I have to ask, what exactly is the United States doing here, especially at a time when reports indicate that talks are ongoing? To me, this is part of the almost schizophrenic nature of U.S. policy. We say one thing, but then we do another. And you have to wonder, is the right hand even talking to the left? Is the White House fully aware of what's happening at the operational level? It's possible some of this is buried in the bureaucracy and never really gets up to strategic decision makers in Washington. It's unclear who exactly is authorizing what, but the core question is, what's the objective? What's the point of firing 4 ATACMS missiles? Look at the scale on the other side. Overnight, Russia launched somewhere around 550 total shots into Ukraine, a mix of advanced long-range drones and missiles. There were about 80 or so missiles of various calibers hitting targets all across Ukraine and causing significant damage, especially to Ukraine's energy system. It made things worse, but it did not knock Ukraine out of the war. That's 80 inches, one salvo, and that kind of number is common. Sometimes the volume is huge, sometimes smaller, but it's regular. Now we compare that to 4 ATACMS, 4. That's rare. And if 80 Russian missiles don't end the war, how is a handful of long-range missiles going into Russia going to affect the tactical front, the course of the battle, the front lines? It won't. So why go down that path? Just because we can? Because someone wants to poke Russia in the eye one last time as the war nears its end? Every time we do something like this, especially when it requires direct American participation, we raise the risk of escalation. Russia could decide this war may be ending, but before it does, we're going to stick it to you. We're going to do something that goes beyond what we've done up to now. That risk of escalation can come from miscalculation, error, bad judgment, anger, foolishness, you name it. As long as we keep playing these games, escalation is on the table. And the key point is there is no benefit whatsoever to the United States. I really hope and pray that the reports we're seeing this morning, reports that talks are gaining momentum, are true, so that we can end this war quickly and get escalation off the table entirely. From the American perspective, there is nothing in this proxy war with Russia that benefits the American people. It's all cost, no gain. The only constant in all the noise about talks, plans for agreements, and frameworks has been Russian advances on the battlefield. We've watched those advances not only around places like Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, but also moving near Seversk and Lyman and across the Donetsk region. On the battlefield, this war of attrition is trending in one direction, Russia's favor. Pokrovsk is essentially gone now. Ukraine holds just a few streets on the outskirts. Its sister city, Myrnohord, is under heavy pressure and effectively under siege. Near Kupiansk, Russian forces are physically tightening the cauldron. It's already under fire control and continues to contract. In the Zaporizhia area, Russian forces are pushing up along the waterway closer to the city of Zaporizhia and its outskirts. Around Seversk, in just the last 12 hours, there have been significant advances into the city, roughly 25% on the outer areas, while strikes continue on areas like Chasiv Yar and Sloviansk. There's also activity around places like Huliai and elsewhere. The pattern is the same. All along the front, from north to south, Russia continues to push forward. Ukraine simply does not have the troops. We now see, even publicly, that Ukraine is mobilizing maybe 17,000 people per month on average. And that's forced mobilization, the lowest quality manpower you can get, because you're literally grabbing people off the street. Desertions are massive. In just the first 10 months of this year, there have been around 161,000 desertions. Battlefield losses are likely in the same range or higher. So the number of people you can bring in versus the number who are killed, wounded, or deserting means Ukraine's fighting strength is shrinking every month. They cannot replace their losses. On the Russian side, the situation is very different. Russia has enough troops to rotate entire units, even entire regiments off the line, give them months to rest, refit, and retrain, and then bring them back in. They are prioritizing firepower over manpower, and they have an advantage there too. They have improved their drones, their anti-drone capabilities, and their glide bombs, which are increasing in both range and lethality. Their drones, like the updated Duran 3 seconds with jet engines, continue to evolve. There is no category where things are truly balanced. In every category that matters, Russia has the advantage, and that advantage is growing. There is no realistic basis on which Ukraine can hope even to avoid defeat, let alone win. Winning isn't even part of the conversation anymore. The question is, can they avoid a catastrophic loss? And increasingly, the answer appears to be no. We see it in territory. German reporter Julian Rupke has noted that Ukraine's territorial losses in November alone are on track to be near 1,000 square kilometers, the most in a single month since early 2023, after the initial invasion line stabilized. In October, Russia captured 586 square kilometers. Now the rate is accelerating. This is going somewhere, and it's bad for Ukraine. The Western media spent years saying Russia is only taking small pieces of land, ignoring what that actually means. Each piece taken represents destroyed defensive lines and further degradation of Ukraine's ability to hold territory. Now we're watching Ukraine lose the ability to hold almost any critical point, and it's important to emphasize Russia's primary objective has not been territory. Territory is a byproduct. The main objective has been the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces, to kill and permanently wound as many Ukrainian soldiers as possible. That is their definition of demilitarization. They aren't relying on a treaty to make Ukraine weak. They're doing it directly on the battlefield. If you reduce Ukrainian manpower and cohesion to a certain minimal point where the fabric of their defense literally tears apart, then you don't need to take territory step by step. At that point, Russian forces can simply drive into undefended areas. There won't be enough troops left to hold the line, and the whole thing collapses. That appears to be Russia's main objective: protect their own troops, rely heavily on overwhelming firepower, and let time do the work. They have all the time in the world. If the front suddenly breaks, it will be like a dam bursting. Russian forces will flood through. Some people in the West are starting to realize just how close we might be to that moment. They want to forestall it. I hope they do. I hope they read the writing on the wall instead of continuing to kick the can down the road while Ukraine's position worsens. Now, while I'm looking at Ukraine, I'm also watching Venezuela very closely. The question is whether we are heading toward direct U.S. strikes on Venezuela. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford has arrived in the Caribbean. The New York Times is reporting that Trump has signed off on CIA plans for covert measures inside Venezuela operations that could be meant to prepare the battlefield for further action. They also report that Trump has reopened back-channel communications with the government of President Nicolas Maduro. So what do these tensions really mean? Is it possible for the U.S. to make a deal with Maduro and back off? Or is this just the buildup to a future war? Everything depends on the talks. Trump was asked recently if he was willing to talk to Maduro. He said, yeah, I'm willing to talk to anybody. When asked what he would talk about, he said, I don't know, you tell me. That's exactly the problem. The most important issue is, what do you want from Maduro? What's the objective? Maduro has already essentially put everything on the table: mineral wealth, oil, gas, basically on a golden plate. Usually that's exactly the kind of thing that works with Trump. Yet, for some reason, he has not been willing to accept it. Some reports say the real discussion is about Maduro leaving power. In other words, Maduro giving up the resources isn't enough. Somebody in Washington, whether it's Trump himself, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of Defense, or others, seems obsessed with regime change. The mindset is Maduro must go. The coup must succeed in one form or another. So the talks appear to be centered on whether Maduro leaves voluntarily or is forced out via military power. Nothing makes sense short of that objective, and that's exactly what worries me. There is nothing in this hemisphere related to Venezuela that justifies war from a U.S. national interest perspective. The war on drugs justification is a smokescreen. There are many other countries in the region far more relevant to drug flows into the United States than Venezuela. Venezuela is way down the list. So if it's not really about drugs, what's left? Regime change. If Maduro doesn't go, what happens next? Trump has all this firepower parked in the region. The temptation to use it is real. But if we do, the outcome could be an absolute unmitigated disaster. We have a lot of firepower, but not a lot of boots on the ground. You can send F-18 seconds to bomb targets, but if you don't put troops on the ground, you don't control anything. You don't force anyone out of power unless you achieve a perfect decapitation strike. If you miss, what then? Are you going to send Marines, another 100,000 troops, start a war, and then walk away? Every path leads to bad outcomes. At best, we would trigger a long-term, low-level insurgency against any U.S. presence or allied forces, with paramilitary retaliation and regional instability. There is no positive outcome here for the United States. I hope sanity prevails and we do not go down that road. And here's another key point. The Venezuelan military has not turned on Maduro. That tells me that even if you carried out a successful decapitation strike, there is nothing to stop his top generals from simply taking over and becoming the next Maduro. You solve nothing. You just create a new version of the same problem in a more hostile environment. So I share the hope that sanity prevails both in Ukraine and Venezuela, and that we step back from further escalation and further wars we cannot win and do not need. If anything in this analysis resonated with you, make sure you like this, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and, of course, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to keep up with all of my work, you can follow me on Substack. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers, Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned on my Patreon page. Dưới đây là bản đã được chỉnh sửa hoàn toàn thay Zelensky thành đúng chính tả Zelensky. Mọi nội dung khác giữ nguyên. Right now, Zelensky is in Turkey, trying to reinvigorate stalled negotiations with Russia. To me, that alone is a major indicator, because Russia has never left the table. Zelensky has spent months talking as if he's delivering surrender terms to the Russians while dressing it up as just and lasting peace, insisting Ukraine must get everything it wants and concede nothing. If he's now in Turkey to restart talks, that almost certainly means he recognizes his terms are going to have to change because he no longer has the power to demand anything. I see several reasons for that. One of the biggest is the massive corruption scandal in Ukraine, which has exploded and is still growing. This actually started a couple of months ago. You might remember NABU, their anti-corruption body. Zelensky tried to disband it by executive fiat. That blew up in his face. The Ukrainian public didn't like it. Western leaders didn't like it. He had to backtrack. Since then, it's gotten much worse. His right-hand man, a guy named Mindik, was accused of embezzling around $100 million. That's Zelensky's inner circle. After that, two more senior figures came under scrutiny. The former defense minister, Umarov, who, by the way, was just in Miami meeting with Steve Witkoff, and now the former energy minister, former deputy prime minister, who has also been incarcerated and accused of large-scale embezzlement. So we're talking about at least three major figures directly tied to Volodymyr Zelensky, all implicated in big corruption cases. Now, I'll say it clearly. What follows is my speculation, but I think it's plausible. Do I believe Ukraine's own internal anti-corruption bodies just suddenly independently uncovered all of this at once and it all just bubbled up organically? Or is it more likely that the United States and the West have decided to tighten the screws on Zelensky? I lean very strongly toward the second explanation. I think someone in Washington and Brussels has told Zelensky, you are going to accept a negotiated settlement. You are going to take what we've been calling the ugly deal. You're going to accept it, or we are going to take other action. And when he resisted or dragged his feet, they followed up with, we know about the corruption. We know where a lot of this money has gone. We may not know every detail, but we know enough. If you don't move, we will expose your right-hand men. And if that still doesn't work, we'll expose you. And not, in other words, you can end up hanging out to dry, possibly even in jail. I don't think it's a coincidence that in the middle of this expanding scandal, Zelensky suddenly goes to Turkey to talk about a negotiated settlement. On the Russian side, you can see their signals too. Dmitry Peskov has been asked about contacts with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. He said, Russia is not currently holding contacts with Witkoff, but in classic Russian fashion. He then said Witkoff is welcome to come to Russia anytime. That phrasing, not currently holding contact, sounds less like nothing has ever happened and more like not at this precise moment. The Moscow Times and others have reported that talks were held in Anchorage and that for now there is nothing to add beyond what was discussed there. When asked about the Axios report on a 28-point peace plan, Peskov essentially indicated the Russian position hadn't changed. There is a growing probability, strongly indicated by Russian comments, that when Trump and Putin met in Anchorage, they discussed the broad outline of an end to the war. Putin almost certainly laid out what he must have to bring the war to a close. Recognition of the 4 oblasts under Russian control, changes to the Ukrainian constitution to protect Russian-speaking people across the country, a firm guarantee of no NATO membership for Ukraine, demilitarization and denazification in Ukraine. These demands are consistent with what Russia was saying as far back as June 2024 and even earlier. By all accounts, Putin said, if you can deliver these terms, we can end this war. So if the United States is now coming to the point where it says, we just want this off the table, and if that's the price, so be it, then that's an acknowledgement of reality, not surrender. You can puff out your chest, stiffen your neck, insist you'll never yield, but if you ignore reality long enough, reality breaks your neck for you. Russia has the capacity to keep going until it physically conquers Ukraine, if it chooses. We are beginning to see that process unfold. Ukraine's energy system is literally falling apart after years of attack. Even Secretary of State Rubio admitted that each season starts from a weaker base and then gets knocked further down. Now the system is being hit even harder. The Kyiv Independent ran a piece titled Destroy, Fix, Repeat. Russia is creating a devastating doom loop inside Ukraine's energy system. The key points were manufacturing replacement parts is slow. Air defense ammunition is running low. Financial resources are wearing thin as Kyiv approaches a funding cliff next year. On top of that, a $100 million corruption scandal has engulfed the energy sector. A Ukrainian official described the effort as, it's like mopping the floor while the tap is still running. And that finance cliff edge is critical. Zelensky himself recently said he needs something like $60 billion just to keep the state functioning in January 2026. That's weeks away. Without that money, they can't pay government salaries or keep basic state functions going. Ukraine's economy is not just damaged, it's destroyed. There is essentially nothing functioning without external aid. You also have a collapsing energy grid, collapsing finances, massive corruption, shortages of air defense systems, relentless Russian strikes. And on top of that, manpower is collapsing, only to 17,000 forced mobilizations per month, 161,000 desertions in 10 months, enormous battlefield casualties. Meanwhile, Russia is increasing troop numbers, increasing firepower, rotating rested units, gaining territory, at the fastest pace since 2022. In October, Russia captured 586 km². In November, they are on pace for 901,000 square kilometers. All fundamentals are up for Russia, and all fundamentals are down for Ukraine. So now we have Trump's Vintwit Point plan, Zelensky in Turkey, Russian signals that Anchorage terms still stand, and the battlefield makes the outcome inevitable. President Trump may now be telling Zelensky, time's up, make the deal, or we expose everything. And I have spoken to contacts with direct access in Kyiv. They confirm secret talks are underway. The Ukrainian government itself confirmed secret negotiations. According to Politico, a deal could come within a week. That is why I'm cautiously optimistic. They're not waking up to reality because they suddenly want peace, but because they have no choice. I'll keep watching this closely and keep you updated as it unfolds.